Welcome to the Dragonfly Rising podcast. I am your host, Dr. Tami Dean. Thank you for joining me today as we continue to work together to make a difference. Let's explore how we can use our voice today. Welcome, everybody. Welcome to the Dragonfly Rising podcast. I am here with Amy Reiman today from Normal, Illinois. She's a teacher at University High School. So, Amy, I'll let you introduce yourself to everyone.
Hello, Tami. Thank you for having me on today. And I am just finished up my 15th year of teaching in a high school English classroom. I teach at a school that is a lab school for university. So it is a choice school, technically publicly funded, but students have to pursue admission to get into that school. And we work with pre-service teachers in the classroom for 12 weeks out of each semester. I'm currently located in the Midwest, not native to the Midwest, but have made my home here and, enjoy it, except for like maybe August and February are a little rough.
When it gets super hot and humid in August,
Yeah.
and then too cold in February, that's
Too cold and too dark.
Oh, yes. Yes, it is dark. So for those of you who don't know, Amy and I worked together at University High School back from, what was that, like 2010 maybe?
10 to
2009 to 2016? 2010 to 16?
Sounds about right.
11 to 16? Something in there. So
I started working with you. It was like my second year of teaching when I started working with you. Thank goodness.
Oh my goodness, you're so sweet. You're so sweet. Was it really?
Yeah.
Oh my gosh. I didn't even realize that. I know. Time flies when you're having fun as an educator, right? Just it doesn't seem like that. But I had great time. So yes, I am currently in Texas, but I am a Midwesterner. I lived in Illinois for 20 years. I wasn't native either. So very exciting. They do exciting stuff at UI. So I'm happy to have Amy here today. We're going to talk a little bit about what they're doing there with restorative justice. But, Amy, I'm curious. You don't just land into, right? Let's do restorative justice. So tell me a little bit about your journey as an educator, thinking about equity, social justice, and those types of spaces.
Sure. I was thinking about this question. And I think that as an educator, both as just a product of my own reading interests and a product of my education program at Illinois State University, I graduated thinking a lot about representation in the language arts curriculum. And I think I also thought of equity and social justice as, a really well-developed curriculum is really going to solve racism and inequity, right? Like I was in that kind of space of,
Right.
No, yeah, because it's a lot of work. It's, important work. But in the classroom, in this country, as it has been so rapidly changing over the last, it's always changing. But suddenly in the classroom, you are hyper aware of it. That was inadequate to the task of, like I said, really getting students to communicate around diverse experiences, to even understand themselves and the ways they want to be in the world, which I think is deeply, like that is a really important goal in my classroom. Language is simply wrapped up in everything we do, how we think about ourselves, how we move in the world, how we establish that community. And so that began for me a really long-term exploration of how do I do this work in a way that is more real and authentic for students. And some of it is skills based. Some of it is, really rooted in civil conversations, and some of it is that social emotional learning, right?
Mhm.
How do I um become aware of my own presence in the classroom? How do I help students become aware of their own social emotional skills?
Mm.
So yeah, it's been kind of a long journey from there. And I think there are crossroads moments that really have emerged in my own teaching. Of course, the election of 2016, I was teaching American Lit at the time, and I had students the day after that election. My Black students came into class wearing all black. I had students come into class wearing MAGA hats, one draped in the American flag. And, that kind of environment can rapidly make you feel inadequate as an
Yeah.
educator.
Wow, what a powerful visual
So,
of what was
yeah,
happening in your classroom at the time, reflecting
yeah,
what's happening in the country at the time.
yeah.
Mhm.
And students they are very aware. These are students that are growing up with the internet. They are far more aware than I was at that age. They are emotionally intertwined with both the celebrations and the outrage that is pervasive on social media.
Mhm.
And I think teenagers have an abiding sense of justice and fairness, and they are looking to adults to help them navigate that. And there aren't a lot of models for that right now. And so I certainly think the classroom, the schools are a place where we can begin to better model what that can look like. And we have some growing to do too, a significant amount.
Don't we all though? But I think you hit on something that's really important. You called it like a long journey, and
Mhm.
that speaks to me, right? Because I think people think when you're trying to do this work, one, either there's like a magic bullet and I've learned all the things, right? And now I do this, and now we can instill justice and equity for everyone, which I would love. Like, I would love, like, if I was somehow, like, had some magical powers and, like, everyone, but it is a journey, right? Like, and
Mhm.
I feel like that's the same for me, right? It started in there's like a catalyst, right? And this catalyst for me goes all the way back to, my undergraduate study to become a teacher. And I had this one professor that shared this, Dream Keepers, that one book, and it became this trajectory to today. And so I think that's important, right? Because there's no matter how long I think you've been learning and engaging with this work and connecting with others, whether that's other adults or students or just, in your daily life, like there's always something to learn in the journey. So I think that was super powerful what you're talking about, like this long journey. Like this is a marathon. This is not a short game kind of experience. Does that
Yeah.
feel true?
That feels true. And I think too, even just the framing it right as learning and as journey, there's an opportunity for joy in that. Like there is this really hard work and navigating the shame and the embarrassment and the right as a teacher, I frequently say to all those students I had my first 5 years, I'm just sorry, come back. I'll,
Oh, I think every
I'll,
educator feels that way because 'cause I'm like, "Oh, y'all, I did my best." Like, I didn't
I
know
did
what
my
I didn't
best,
know,
but
and I'm so much better now. So
yeah.
glad you made it.
But I think like there's also some relief in being able to say that, like, okay, I have learned, and that learning is what as an educator feels sacred to me. We are designed for learning and for wonder and curiosity. And there are moments even around this vast injustice that exists that persists in our society to experience that joy of learning and of seeing, oh,
Mm,
but I've changed. I think differently. My students changed. They're thinking differently. And so, yeah, I think there's a built-in reward there too.
Yeah, yeah. I love that. The joy and finding the moments of joy, small or large, right?
Right.
In that journey. So you talked a little bit about, right, sitting in this moment and feeling inadequate. Like what do I do? Like what do I do in this climate? And I think that's really important because I think oftentimes society tries to paint schools as apolitical, and they're
Mm,
not political spaces, but schools honestly mirror the systems and structures that exist in, you know, the country that we live in, right? For better or for worse. And there are things that are great about that, and there are things that are challenging, right? Things like you mentioned we can do better. So when you're feeling like that, so you felt like I'm inadequate, what do I do, right?
mm.
What were some things that you did do? Like, what would you say or share with others? Like, what do you do in those moments? Like, because you're in a different space now, right? So you've definitely taken some
Mm.
action.
So, I think there are like, what I did do in the moment was we're gonna pause. We're gonna pause on the flags. We're gonna pause on the conversation. I set up a silent discussion in a Google Doc for my students that was highly structured, that just began with, right, what are the feelings that you're bringing into this classroom today? What do you need? And that was what we did for that was our starting point for that day. I think, I mean, in terms of how I would respond now, still a pause.
Yeah.
There's a lot that can be done with a I'm noticing, right, the reaction that has just occurred in this room, and I'm wondering if other people have noticed it, how we're feeling. And they can be quick interventions
Mhm.
into because the thing that happens in a classroom is however much Americans don't want politics to come into the classroom, however much a teacher doesn't want them to come into the classroom, teenagers carry those emotions with them into every space. Every human does.
Right.
Teenagers, they're delightfully amped up in those emotions sometimes. So they're there whether you address them or not. And I think, it's pausing, but I also think I've done a lot of growth and learning in just social emotional development and what's going on with our parasympathetic nervous system, our sympathetic nervous system, and how do we get a group of people to take a deep breath to bring that prefrontal cortex back online. So there's some really concrete things, but the question for me is always two, how are we going to then move towards and build towards the classroom community that we want to create together? And I think sometimes it's as simple and maybe obvious as co-constructing group norms,
Uh-huh.
you know, co-constructing responses rather than reactions. So I do a lot with building sentence frames together. We do This is not my creation. It's from, the book Letting Go of Literary Whiteness,
Yeah.
and they have some great kind of moves that occur in classrooms that they dub white educational discourse, and they're educational conversation moves that we often use to gloss over or move back to niceness rather than navigate the actual topic that we need to
Mm,
be unpacking, whether it's in literature, whether it's personal, whether it's, racial, social. And so we do some activities early on where hey, let's look at this scenario. What's a way that we can respond that would move us back towards these, group community norms that we've established for how we want to be together? And it doesn't take a lot of time. It
Mm.
takes it takes intention, and it takes building a space too where we can say, "Hey, this isn't working. Let's
Yeah,
go back and fix this together." And then of course, restorative practices have become a huge part of how we communicate in my classroom, from using circles to familiarizing students with that vocabulary of restorative justice, restorative practices, which is premised on how do we work with and support people to do things with them rather than to or for them,
yeah,
which is that's our goal as educators. How can I support you with your learning that is both academic and skills based, and also, moving towards that adulthood?
right, right. I think that's so powerful, right? Like the co-constructing, because people get a chance, and I'm gonna say people, meaning students, right?
Hmm.
To to have a voice in the space in which they're engaging with, because students are in school for the majority of their day. And in the absence of that voice, I feel like they still try to find a way to exert their voice. So, how powerful is it to be intentional, like you were talking about, intentional in setting those things up? So, you were alluding to the restorative justice practices. So, and this may be exactly how you got started, but kind of tell me more about that and how that got started and where you are and all the good things.
Yeah. So I had an opportunity through our regional office of education, and this was the summer of 2017. So it was after the election. It was part of my kind of questing for how do I do better at this, at helping my students develop these skills for civil conversations. And I happened to sign up for a workshop with Kevin Jones, who's an IIRP, which is like, something international restorative practice, Institute of International Restorative Practices. And he was collaborating with our Office of Education, with all sorts of community workers, teachers, social workers, police, juvenile detention facilitators, and was really, and it has continued this work of bringing restorative practices to our towns of Bloomington Normal. And I believe it was a 4-day workshop on introducing the concepts of restorative justice, working through scenarios, and, application of how we could bring this into our spaces, just networking. What does it mean, especially because it was a lot of people working with the young adults? What do restorative practices look like in each of our areas? And that launched me into attending a series of workshops and reading just to understand, right, what was this essentially indigenous practice that has been around for thousands of years, and the research into it and how it's being applied in education. And I don't want to tout restorative justice as a cure all, right? It's not a band-aid, it's not a fix, but it is an approach that I think has really provided me with a framework for that intentionality that I
Mm.
mentioned. And so I brought it to my faculty, and we operate with something called shared governance. And so shared some tidbits about it and asked faculty if they would be interested in pursuing it further. And they were. They were interested in learning more. And so my principal and I began attending, we attended another workshop, particularly for launching and training people to be facilitators in restorative practice. And we've done that in collaboration with the College of Education at ISU, which is kind of our umbrella organization.
Mhm.
And then we spent this past year, because of course the pandemic interrupted a lot
Oh.
of things.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
Although I was also grateful for the concept of circles and restorative practice through the pandemic. Um,
Yes, yes, I bet. Oh my gosh.
yeah. And so this past year was the first, like, we did a lot of faculty workshops that the principal and I facilitated and introduced them to concepts of that idea of, affective language and becoming aware of the ways in which, emotions are present. And so how to navigate those in ways that align to our desire to support students, with their education and moving away from some punitive and perhaps permissive behaviors within our culture. And so I think that after this first year, we're in a place where we're very comfortable with some of the language of restorative practices. I think we're in a place where we're working to imagine what it can look like in more of our day-to-day interactions. The Probably the most powerful experience this year was I got to participate. We have a group called the Student Diversity Committee, and
Mhm.
it's a group of students that are both selected and volunteer that are they're pulled from every sport, every activity within the school, our student senate. And so we try to have representation from all parts of the student body. And we spent a day with them on, hey, this is what restorative justice is. These are, of course, circles are the things that people are most familiar with
Right,
restorative justice. That really is just one small piece of it. But we had a hate based incident towards the end of the school year, and the students asked for circles. And that is where, when students start asking for these practices, right? That's where it's going to gain its momentum within our
right.
culture. That's where I
Yeah.
think it will have most potential to shift our culture into something that is more restorative, something more that offers
Well,
a little bit of redemption, right? Something, it's an alternative to cancel culture.
yes,
So,
yes. Well, and you you want people to want to be involved, right? Like, you want
yeah,
no one likes including I always say this, right? Like, sometimes we forget that students are just younger or smaller humans, right? So, in the same ways, right, we as adults want our voice to be valued and heard, and students also want to have their voices valued and heard and be a part of that process, right? Like, I have thoughts, I have experiences, I have feelings. So help me, in that process on how do I use those, right? Like, there's still well, I think we're
right,
all well, to be honest, we're all still learning that. I mean, maybe I'll just speak for myself, right?
right,
Like, but so that's why I think that is powerful, right? Like, that engagement, it's a together versus to you. Like, it's not something we do to students.
right. And sometimes they just have such better ideas
Oh,
than,
absolutely. You're like, "Oh my god, that's brilliant. Yes. I love that. I never would have thought
yeah,
about that." Right? And yes, yes, students are brilliant.
yes, they are. No.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm sorry. I interrupted your train of thought. I'm so sorry. Keep going. Keep going.
Oh,
So, yeah.
yeah. So that's pretty much it. That's kind of where we're at with, we're continuing to implement, these restorative practices. My principal and I had another opportunity this past year to go to these 6 workshops called Pathways to Restorative Leadership. And each of them was themed around a component of restorative justice, which I think was really helpful for getting us also to a place where we can share with faculty more than, it's more than circles.
Right.
Things like, maintaining intentional community building, the trauma informed restorative practices. It's just a number of things that will, continue to develop, that have continued to develop our toolbox. So I'm eager to continue sharing that with faculty.
Yeah, that's exciting. I think that's important,
Yeah.
right? Like, the continuity, like, it's not just we did a circle or, they
Yeah.
also the intentionality around supporting educators with what does that look like? Because I feel like sometimes it's like, "Oh, put your students in groups and then have a conversation." And then, you know, and we've seen this with other things in education, right? And then they're like, "Oh, that didn't work. I tried it one time and it didn't work, so I'm gonna go back to what I did." So,
Yeah.
the consistency, right? The intentionality, like, I keep hearing these themes, right? Like, consistency, intentionality, collaboration, and I think even vulnerability,
Mm.
right? On the educator side, I don't always know or have all the answers, which is okay because I can sit in my humanity too and allow space for my students to be in their humanity also, and then how do we move through things together?
Yeah. And I think about one of the things students expressed concerns about through surveys, through some conversations we had with them was what they wanted to know teachers were going to intervene when they heard something. And of course, teachers they're overtasked, they're overworked, they're underpaid, all the things.
Mhm.
But teachers also want to know and believe that they are hearing for the students who are right in their care during their
Yeah.
classroom. And so that was also one of the professional development sessions that we had was, what do you do? When you hear something that is, what is it? My students, I don't think they say this anymore. That's out of pocket, right? That- Something that's a
Right.
little, right. No, I know they're not supposed to say that. And so
Mm.
we worked with students and with teachers on what are some ways to say, hey, did I hear this? I don't want this to go unnoticed. If it's, you offer a space for a student to self correct, you offer a space for the student to explain or to clarify if you heard it
Mhm.
wrong, but you address it. And that way, students begin to see teachers as the models for, hey, we're humans. We're gonna enter conflict. We're gonna hear things, right? This is a space where we get to learn how our words impact others, and we take
Mhm.
that seriously. And again, not it's we borrowed from I want to say Kathy O'Bear's pairs system, which
Uh-huh.
don't ask me to spin it off right now, but it's kind of pausing, acknowledging, intervening, right?
Mhm.
That can be some really quick but important moves that teachers can make, that students can make to disrupt that conversation that's going to go south if it's unaddressed or is going to be splashed on social media and create more havoc than if we learn how to navigate the discomfort in the moment.
Right. Oh, that's so powerful. Learning to navigate the discomfort. I
No.
like, I think that is a important concept to remember, like, it doesn't always feel comfortable, right? Like, it's
Right.
uncomfortable, but how do you sit in that uncomfort to get to resolution or understanding or, whatever that movement leads to, but you sit there and engage with it. And, you've said this a couple times too, like the pausing. I think, like, that's also very powerful, the pause, because when we hear or see things, we can, you know, have this rush of emotion, whatever that
Mhm.
emotion is, right? Positive or negative. And then the reaction may not be the reaction that supports or helps or moves things forward, or even is the reaction you really wanted to have, but because without the pause, you just, I don't even know what I want to say, like vomit all the things out of your mouth, right? And then later, and you can't take back what comes once it's out there in the world and you've said it to somebody else, right? You can't take that back.
Right.
So the pause helps you think about that, but then I think it continues on, right? Because maybe I pause later before I say something when someone has done exactly what you're talking, like, I'm pausing, I'm interrupting, I'm asking you, and we're following through on this thing, this incident that just happened, that something that just said that affects another person. So perhaps I pause
Right.
later on, or the student that was involved, or the teacher, or whomever, right, pauses. It helps us have more empathy and see somebody else's worldview or perspective or consider their experience, I think. Do you see that happening
Yeah.
in as you've been, like, working through and having some of these opportunities?
Oh, yeah, I think so, and I think right, that difference of reacting versus responding is so like, that's where agency lies. And that's where I'm getting to choose to be the person that I wanna be, and so I'll give a quick example. We also do another scenario building activity, and it's around, what this book is anti-racist.
Uh-huh.
I just pull the pages on calling in versus calling out, and I need to give credit to my colleague, Becca Hoffman, for bringing this onto my radar.
Uh-huh.
Right. You know, that I love the way she articulates in those. It's like just 2 to 3 pages, very short. It's a beautiful book,
It is, it is.
visually. Yeah, it has a lot of appeal for teenagers and for me. But I love the way she frames calling in and calling out as choices, and that she sets it up around your personal boundaries around, so calling in, right? There are ways to, someone says something and you can, that's out of pocket, something that's off kilter, and you can pause and invite them into explain, say, hey, you know, this is how it made me feel. Did you know that it would have that impact? Right. And work to bridge. But sometimes you don't have the emotional bandwidth for that. Sometimes you, right, need to pass it off to someone else. Sometimes it's the third time they've said something like that, and they've lost their chances. And so now it's time to call out, or and so she just walks through what those different consequences are, and not consequences as exclusively negative, but consequences as in, this is the impact it has on you, this is the impact it has on the conversation and your community. And that's a choice. And that is really empowering, even just as a woman, to
Yes.
think about, right? When I'm choosing to call out or be irritated versus when I'm choosing to try to build that bridge when someone has said something, and I'm like, I don't think they know what they're saying.
Yes.
um,
Yes. Oh,
yeah.
that agency, so powerful, like,
Yeah.
the choice when we all have a choice. Oh my gosh, so exciting, so many exciting things. So, where are you all like, where are you going? Like, we're getting ready to start a new school year, coming up pretty quickly. So, what does that look like based on what you've done? Like, where are you all headed moving into this next year?
So our school is working with something called the MCOD. It's the Multicultural Organizational Development Model.
Mhm.
And it is a very much aligned to restorative practices. It is a model of really recursive um, practices or checks on where are we at with equity in these different areas of our school, right? There are so many different regions of a school that have impact on student success, that have impact on culture. And we are just slowly implementing that model into how we look at our curriculum, how we look at we've done some work with our handbook, our student handbook,
Mm.
and some revising of the policies there. We are continuing to work with our student diversity committee, and our goal with the students is to develop a sort of in-school retreat day where because we had, I believe it was about 50 students in our
Mhm.
population of 600 get trained on restorative circles and facilitating those. And so we want to create a day where they can share that with their peers and begin to develop some language, some cultural language around that within our school. And then our student diversity committee has also created both UI values statement
Mhm.
and a list of actions that they crafted for this is what it means to live out these values. And so they have asked for an opportunity to also share that with the students and kind of brand the school with those
Right.
action statements.
I love
So
that.
those are some of our moves.
That's exciting, that's exciting. I love how involved the students are in this process and that they get to engage with it as well. So, it's again, back to that collaborative opportunity and effort and ownership, right? Because you
Mhm.
know, the school is their space too, just as much as it
Yeah,
belongs to, the faculty and the adults that are there. So I think that that is huge, and they get to support each other in that and how they're living out those values and what that means to be there. So I love that. I love that. I'm excited to hear more about how that all
yeah.
goes in the continuing journey this year. So one of the things that I like to do is we think about like the what is the next step? Like how do I use my voice as an
Mm.
educator? How do I just do that one next thing? So just thinking about your journey, what would be a like a pro tip you'd want to share with an educator that might be starting out, or might be in the middle, whatever, wherever they are in their journey,
Mhm.
what is something you'd like to share with them from your perspective as an educator?
Boy, one thing I think educators are often so hard on themselves. And so, I mean, I know a lot of perfectionists in the field of education.
Yes. Mm,
And I think that when it comes to social justice and equity, that we can sometimes get consumed by the big picture of it
mhm,
and the systems that we're trying to work, the history we're working to both make people aware of and change and find joy and as we're, living our
mhm,
daily lives. And so I I think being clear about your own values and intentions. And I think that check in at the end of the day of I don't know where my sister got this from, but it's brilliant. She calls it no such thing as a 0 day.
okay.
And at the end of the day, right, what is the one thing you did that was aligned with those values that moved you towards that space of a more just community that you're working to create, and to know that, that those small things matter and they build over time. And gosh, in the end, we're modeling
Mhm.
learning with a room full of students who are watching whether we think they are or not. And that's a pretty significant impact. So,
Absolutely. Absolutely. Love that.
yeah.
What is that one thing? Yeah. So think about what is your one thing, everyone, at the end of your day that you've done to move towards your values. I think that's so important. Amy, I want to thank you so much for joining me today. It has been just such a pleasure to talk with you and hear more about what types of work you're doing there at UI.
Yeah. Thank you so much for having me.
This wraps up another episode of the Dragonfly Rising podcast with me, your host, Dr. Tami Dean. Thank you so much for joining us. And remember that action is always greater than inaction. How will you use your voice today?